her entire library gone. While Emily fought for her life in rehab, her family sold every book she'd ever cherished, from signed first editions to her grandmother's weathered poetry collection. 20 years of carefully curated memories, wiped out with a yard sale sign, and strangers' hands carrying away pieces of her soul. When she finally returned home, weak but hopeful, all that remained were dust outlines on empty walls and excuses about needing the space and just things that were collecting dust anyway. What would you do if your family betrayed your most treasured possessions while you were at your most vulnerable? If this story moved you, comment below with your experiences. Like, subscribe, and share with someone who knows that trust, once broken, is the hardest thing to rebuild. Books had been Emily's sanctuary since she was 7 years old, when her grandmother first placed The Secret Garden in her small hands. "Books are more than paper and ink," grandmother had whispered, her voice soft as the pages they turned together. "They're doorways to everywhere you haven't been yet." After grandmother died, Emily inherited her collection of poetry volumes, spines and pencil-marked margins that still carried the scent of lilac perfume. Those books became the foundation stone of Emily's own library through high school. When the other girls collected makeup and boyfriends' Letterman jackets, Emily collected words. Her parents didn't understand but tolerated what they called her quirk. Her father built shelves that stretched across her bedroom walls, sighing about the weight capacity of the second floor. College brought financial independence and the dangerous knowledge of credit cards. Emily's collection grew methodically. First editions found in dusty shops during semester breaks, signed copies from author events she'd travel hours to attend, paperbacks with coffee stains and bus ticket bookmarks from every trip she took. Collection told her story better than any diary could have. The medical textbooks from her abandoned pre-med phase, the dog-eared travel guides from the year she nearly moved to Prague, the comprehensive collection of Russian literature that coincided with her first serious boyfriend, Alexei. When Emily bought her apartment at 30, the realtor had remarked that the living room's wall space was perfect for a television. Emily had nodded politely while mentally measuring for bookshelves. She'd commissioned custom-built oak shelving, spending what others might on a luxury car. The books had their own room, a library that doubled as her home office. Thought the pride of her collection wasn't the valuable first editions or the signed copies. It was the curation itself, 20 years of her life, organized not by author or genre, but by the emotional geography of her memories. She could walk to a specific shelf, reach for a specific spine, and be transported to exactly who she was when she first read those words. There was the shelf of books that had saved her during her darkest times, the poetry she'd read during her grandmother's funeral, the novels that kept her company during a bout of pneumonia her senior year of college, the self-help books that guided her through her first heartbreak. Friends teased her about the impossibility of dating someone with so many books. Where would they put their stuff? Her friend Diane had joked. But Emily had always known that the right person would understand that the books weren't things, they were extensions of herself. Some people collected snow globes or vintage wines or designer shoes. Emily collected stories, ideas, worlds contained between covers. Each book was a conversation she'd had with an author, marked with her notes in the margins, her questions, her agreements and arguments. Her mother had once asked, "What will you do with all these when you're gone?" Emily had smiled. "I'll leave them to someone who understands their value isn't in what they're worth but in what they contain." Now, standing in the empty room that had once held her life's collection, Emily couldn't breathe. The shelves themselves were gone too, leaving only shadow marks on the wall where they had stood for years. She ran her fingertips along these ghosts, feeling the slightly darker paint, the small nail holes. 20 years of careful collection, hundreds of books, each one chosen deliberately, each one meaningful. Gone. And with them, the physical manifestation of who Emily had been throughout her life, the tangible proof of her journey, her growth, her healing, her joy, her history, sold off piece by piece by the very people who should have understood what those books truly meant. The accident happened on a Tuesday evening in October. Rain had been falling steadily all day, turning the fallen leaves into a treacherous carpet on the sidewalks. Emily had been rushing home from work, a new book tucked safely in her waterproof messenger bag, when her foot slipped on wet concrete steps outside the subway station. The doctors later told her she was lucky. The fall could have killed her. Instead, it had resulted in a compound fracture of her right leg, a dislocated shoulder, and a concussion that left her dazed and confused in the emergency room. Surgery followed, then pain constant, grinding, pain that made her teeth clench and her vision blur. The prescribed oxycodone made the world soft around the edges, manageable. When the prescription ran out but the pain remained, Emily found herself counting the hours until her next refill, then counting pills, rationing them, panicking when the bottle grew light. Her doctor noticed the signs. "I think we need to discuss pain management alternatives," he'd said gently. Emily had nodded, ashamed but relieved. Someone had seen her drowning before she went completely under. The rehabilitation center was in a converted Victorian mansion, in the countryside, 2 hours from the city. Emily had packed carefully for her 3-month stay, comfortable clothes, toiletries, her journal, and 7 books, one for each stage of grief. She joked weakly to her mother as they packed the cart. "You'll be home before you finish them," her mother had said, hugging her awkwardly around her crutches. Those 7 books became lifelines during her first month of withdrawal, when her body shook with chills and her mind raced with anxiety. Emily would read the same paragraph over and over until the words anchored her to something outside her suffering. During group therapy, she quoted passages that articulated feelings she couldn't yet name. At night, when sleep evaded her, she'd read by the dim light of her phone until exhaustion finally claimed her. By the 2nd month, Emily had read each book twice. Her therapist, Dr. Winters, noticed her restlessness during their sessions. "I'm running out of books," Emily admitted. "I feel like I'm running out of air." Dr. Winters arranged for Emily to help in the center's small library, a room with 3 bookshelves and an eclectic collection of donated volumes. Emily's hands shook less when she was organizing, cataloging, recommending titles to other residents. For a few hours each day, she could focus on something beyond her recovery, beyond the constant work of rebuilding her life without chemical assistance. During family weekend, her parents and sister visited. Emily proudly showed them the library she'd reorganized, explained the new checkout system she'd implemented. "You and your books," her sister had said with a laugh that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Some things never change." "That's good, right?" Emily had asked, suddenly uncertain that her father had changed the subject. The 3rd month brought significant improvements. Physical therapy strengthened her leg. Group therapy strengthened her resolve. Emily began planning her return home, imagining the comfort of her own bed, her own shower, her books, especially her books. She dreamed of spending a full day just running her fingers along their spines, reacquainting herself with old friends who had waited patiently for her return. "What are you looking forward to most about going home?" Dr. Winters asked during their final session. "My library," Emily answered without hesitation. "I've missed being surrounded by all those stories, all those possibilities." Dr. Winters smiled. "You've done remarkable work here, Emily. Remember that your recovery is still fragile. You'll need to establish new routines, new coping mechanisms." "I know," Emily said, "but I have my books to help me through." They always have. On her last day, Emily returned the 7 books she'd brought to the center's library, adding her name to the inside covers. "So part of me stays here to help someone else," she explained to the staff member who checked them in. The drive home with her mother was filled with cautious optimism. Emily stared out the window at the spring landscape, so different from the autumn world she'd left behind. Everything was new, fresh, possible. "We made some changes while you were gone," her mother mentioned casually as they neared the city. "Just a little spring cleaning. Nothing major." Emily nodded absently, already imagining the reunion with her books, mentally selecting which one she would read first on this, her first night of her new beginning. "Where are all my books?" Emily repeated, her voice gaining strength as her mother emerged from the kitchen, drying her hands on a dish while, "Oh honey." Her mother's expression shifted from welcome to something more guarded. "Your father's in the garage, let me get him." Emily remained frozen in the doorway of her library, former library as her parents converged. Her father's work boots tracked mud on the hardwood floor she'd so carefully maintained. "You're looking well," he said, reaching for a hug that Emily stepped away from. "My books," she said again. "What happened to my books?" Her parents exchanged a glance, the kind that contained an entire conversation. Her mother spoke first. "We thought it would be good for you to come home to a fresh start. All those books were just what?" Emily's voice was dangerously quiet. "Collecting dust," her father finished, "taking up space. You have to admit, Emily, it was excessive. Excessive." The word felt like gravel in her mouth. "They were mine. Every single one of them was mine." Her mother's smile turned brittle. We kept the important ones, the really valuable ones. Emily scanned the room again, noticing for the first time a small cardboard box in the corner. She crossed to it, knelt despite the protest from her still healing leg, and opened the flaps. Inside were perhaps 20 books, bestsellers mostly, the kind sold in airport gift shops. None of her first editions, none of her grandmother's collection, none of the books that had actually mattered. Where's grandmother's poetry collection? Her fingers dug into the cardboard. Another glance between her parents. Emily, her father used his reasonable voice, the one he'd used when explaining why she couldn't have a dog as a child. Those old books were falling apart. They were worthless, they were priceless, she corrected, standing again with effort. They were the most important thing I owned. That's not healthy, her mother interjected. They were objects, Emily, just objects. Emily's laugh was hollow. Where are they now? We had an estate sale. Her father straightened his shoulders. Made quite a bit, actually. Enough to cover some of the medical bills that insurance didn't. The room tilted slightly, and Emily grabbed the empty bookshelf for support. You sold them. It was for your benefit, her mother insisted. And we've redecorated this room so nicely. Look, there's space for a proper sitting area now. You could get a television when, Emily interrupted. When did you sell them? Her parents exchanged another look. A couple of months ago, her father admitted. Once we knew your rehab was going well. Emily felt something inside her crack. 2 months ago, I still had another month of treatment. We didn't think you'd mind so much, her mother said, her voice taking on the wounded tone Emily knew well. After all you've been through, we thought material possessions would seem less important. Less important, Emily repeated, her voice rising. Those books got me through all I've been through. They were my history, my comfort, She stopped, seeing the blank incomprehension on her parents' faces. Her father checked his watch. Your sister and her family are coming for dinner, to welcome you home. Why don't you rest a bit before they arrive? Emily stared at him in disbelief. Did you hear anything I just said? You sold my books without my permission while I was in recovery. Those books were everything to me. That's exactly the problem, her mother said quietly. Books shouldn't be everything to anyone. It's not normal, Emily. Normal. Emily's laugh was bitter. Like pretending everything's fine at a family dinner after what you've done is normal. Her father's expression hardened. We did what we thought was best while you were getting help for your issue. The way he said issue, like her addiction was a minor inconvenience, something shameful to be hidden away, ignited Emily's anger further. My issue doesn't give you the right to dispose of my property, she said. Those books were mine, not yours to sell, not yours to decide were worthless. They're gone now, her mother said with finality. There's no use dwelling on it. Part of recovery is learning to let go of the past. Emily looked between them, these people who had raised her but had never truly seen her, who could dismiss 20 years of her life as excessive, who could sell her most precious possessions without a second thought. You're right about one thing, Emily said quietly. I am learning to let go. She turned and walked out of the empty library, leaving her parents standing amid the absence they had created, surrounded by all the space they'd made by erasing her. Dinner was an exercise in restraint. Emily sat at her parents' dining table, pushing food around her plate, while her sister Jennifer detailed her children's latest achievements. Her brother-in-law David commented on how open the apartment looked now, winking at Emily's father. The children, oblivious to the tension, chattered about school and soccer. Emily excused herself early, claiming fatigue from the journey home. It wasn't entirely a lie. The weight of what she'd lost pressed down on her chest, making it difficult to breathe. Back in her bedroom, the only space seemingly untouched by her parents. Improvements. Emily opened her laptop. Creating a new spreadsheet, she titled it simply, Books. From memory, she began to list them all. First, her grandmother's collection, 12 volumes of poetry, 3 leather-bound classics, and a first-edition Jane Eyre with a cracked spine, and her grandmother's maiden name inscribed in faded ink on the FLYLEAF. Next, her first editions, Updike, Morrison, Murakami, Tart, the signed copies from author events, Zadie Smith, whose pen had leaked slightly on the title page, David Mitchell, who had drawn a small labyrinth beside his signature, Margaret Atwood, who had written Keep Writing after Emily mentioned her journal. She worked methodically through the night, reconstructing her library from memory. By dawn, the spreadsheet contained over 800 titles, organized by sentimental value, estimated financial worth, and likelihood of being traceable. Her eyes burned with exhaustion and unshed tears as she stared at the document, this ghost library that existed now only in her memory, and this digital record. Sleep claimed her briefly, hunched over her laptop. She woke disoriented, momentarily forgetting where she was and what had happened. For a few blessed seconds, she thought she might go to her library and select a book to read with her morning coffee. Reality crashed back with brutal force. Emily showered, dressed, and ventured out to the kitchen. Her mother was baking. A stress response Emily recognized from childhood. "I made your favorite blueberry muffins," her mother said brightly. "How did you sleep?" Emily ignored the question. "I need to see the records from the estate sale." Her mother's hands stilled over the mixing bowl. "What for?" "I want to know where my books went." Emily kept her voice level. "Who bought them? How much they paid?" "Emily, I don't think that's healthy. What's not healthy is selling someone's possessions without their consent while they're in treatment." Emily didn't raise her voice. "The records, Mom, please." Her mother wiped her hands on her apron, her expression uncertain. "Your father handled most of it. There's probably something in his office." Emily found her father's home office, unchanged, the same leather chair, the same filing cabinets, the same meticulous organization. The irony wasn't lost on her. Her father's space had been respected while hers had been erased. The filing cabinet yielded what she was looking for, a folder labeled estate sale, March. Inside were handwritten receipts, newspaper classified ads, and printouts of online listings. Estate sale, extensive book collection including rare editions and signed copies. Saturday, March 12, 8 a.m., 4 p.m. March 12. Emily had been exactly halfway through her rehabilitation program, celebrating 30 days sober, when her parents had been selling off her life's collection. The receipts told a story of ignorance and carelessness. Her grandmother's poetry collection, worth thousands to collectors, priceless to Emily, had sold for $75 to someone identified only as L. Richardson. Her signed first edition Donna Tartt had gone for $50. Most painful was the receipt for box lot miss paperbacks, $20 for what must have been dozens of books, each one carefully chosen, each one meaningful. Emily photographed every document, then returned the folder exactly as she'd found it. Back in her room, she updated her spreadsheet with the new information: buyer names, where available, sale prices, dates. The total was just under $3,000. $3,000 for a collection that had taken 20 years to build, that had cost her tens of thousands, that contained volumes worth far more in the rare book market too. Say nothing of their incalculable personal value. Her phone chimed with a text from Dr. Winters. "How's your first day home going?" Emily stared at the message, unsure how to respond. The rehab center had emphasized honesty as essential to recovery, but what words could possibly convey the magnitude of what had happened? She typed simply, "They sold my books, all of them, while I was in treatment." Dr. Winters replied almost immediately, "Can we talk? This is a significant challenge to your recovery." Emily agreed to a video call later that afternoon. Until then, she had work to do. She added a column to her spreadsheet, action plan. Next to each entry, she began noting possible ways to track down the books, local bookstores that might have purchased the more valuable volumes, online forums for book collectors, the mysterious L. Richardson who had bought her grandmother's collection. It would be like finding scattered pieces of herself, Emily realized, a literary scavenger hunt for her own identity. As she worked, a small, hard certainty formed in her chest. She could not stay in this apartment with these people who had so fundamentally misunderstood and betrayed her. Emily's video call with Dr. Winters was brief but clarifying. "This is a significant setback," the therapist acknowledged, her face serious on Emily's laptop screen. "But remember your tools. How are you processing this?" "I'm making a plan," Emily said, showing her spreadsheet. "I'm going to find as many of my books as I can." Dr. Winters nodded slowly. "That's certainly constructive. But I'm concerned about your living situation. Being around the people who, regardless of their intentions, caused this breach of trust could trigger relapse behaviors." Emily hadn't considered that perspective, but it resonated immediately. The hollow ache in her chest that had been present since discovering the empty library was dangerously similar to the physical cravings she'd fought in early recovery. "I don't have anywhere else to go right now," she admitted. Focus on your sobriety first, Dr. Winters advised. Perhaps your search can be part of that a positive goal, but don't let it consume you. After the call, Emily mapped out the 4 bookstores closest to her parents' apartment. The first 3 yielded nothing. The staff vaguely remembered a large collection coming in months ago, but couldn't recall specifics or buyer information. The 4th store, Bookmark, was a small shop, specializing in used and rare books. The bell above the door jingled as Emily entered. The familiar scent of paper and binding glue made her throat tighten with longing. An elderly man looked up from behind the counter. "Can I help you find something?" Emily approached, suddenly uncertain. "Actually, I'm looking for books that used to be mine. They were sold about 2 months ago while I was away. An entire collection, including some valuable first editions and signed copies." Recognition flickered in the man's eyes. "You must be the daughter." Emily's heart quickened. "You remember the sale? Hard to forget." He removed his reading glasses. "Your parents brought in several boxes, said they were clearing space." He frowned slightly. "I thought it was strange. It was clearly a carefully curated collection. I offered a fair price for the lot, but they'd already sold most of the valuable ones elsewhere, to someone named L. Richardson." The bookseller nodded. "Liam Richardson, collector from upstate, comes down monthly to check my new acquisitions. Do you have his contact information?" The man hesitated. "I shouldn't, please." Emily's voice cracked. "Those books were everything to me, especially my grandmother's poetry collection. They were sold without my knowledge or consent while I was in rehabilitation." The bookseller's expression softened. "Rehabilitation, not vacation. That explains it." He studied her face. "I have his email. And I did purchase about 40 books from your parents. Still have most of them in the back." Relief flooded through Emily. "Could I see them?" He led her to a storage room, where several boxes sat stacked against a wall. "Haven't had time to process them all. Feel free to look through." Emily knelt beside the nearest box, her hands trembling slightly as she lifted the flaps. Inside were familiar spines, not her most precious volumes, but books she had read and loved nonetheless. A paperback copy of The Hours with Coffee Stains, on page 87. A collection of essays she'd annotated extensively during graduate school. A battered copy of The Great Gatsby from her high school days. She lifted each one carefully, checking for her small bookplate on the inside cover, or her distinctive signature on the title page. Some had notes in the margins in her handwriting, evidence of past conversations with the text. "These are definitely mine," she confirmed, looking up at the bookseller. "I figured as much." He crossed his arms. The collection was too personal to be sold off by someone who actually cared about books. Emily winced at the unintentional barb. "How much would you want for them?" The bookseller named a figure significantly higher than what he'd paid her parents. "That's what they're worth," he added, seeing her expression. "I run a business, not a charity." Emily calculated quickly. The amount would take most of her savings, but these 40 books were tangible pieces of her past. "I'll take them. All of them?" "All of them," she confirmed. "And if you could email me Liam Richardson's contact information, I'd be grateful." While the bookseller processed her credit card, Emily examined a bulletin board near the register. Among the flyers for reading groups and local events was a small index card. "Bookfinding service, rare and out-of-print volumes located. Contact Margaret." Emily snapped a photo with her phone just as the bookseller returned with her receipt and a handwritten note with Richardson's email. "A word of advice," he said as he helped her carry the boxes to her car. "Richardson is particular about his collection. He won't sell easily, especially if he thinks the books are valuable." "They're valuable to me," Emily said simply. "That's precisely the kind of sentiment that will make him raise his price." The bookseller handed her the last box. "You might need a different approach." Back at her parents' apartment, Emily smuggled the boxes into her bedroom before anyone noticed. Her mother was out shopping, her father at work, the empty library now being converted into what appeared to be a guest sitting room. Sent a fresh wave of pain through her chest as she passed it in her room. Emily carefully unpacked each recovered book, placing them on her bedroom shelves. 40 books, a tiny fraction of what she'd lost, but a start. She ran her fingers along their spines, reconnecting with each one, remembering when and where she'd first read them. Then she emailed Liam Richardson, identifying herself only as an interested buyer, inquiring about poetry collections he might have acquired in recent months. She followed this with a message to the bookfinder she'd seen advertised, explaining her situation and specifically mentioning her grandmother's collection as her highest priority. As she worked, Emily felt a strange calm, replacing the shock and anger. This was something concrete. She could do a treasure hunt with clear parameters. Each book recovered would be a small victory, a piece of herself reclaimed. She glanced at the tiny bookshelf in her bedroom, now holding the rescued volumes. It wasn't her library, not even close, but it was a beginning. 3 days passed with no response from Liam Richardson. Emily refreshed her email obsessively while continuing her search, visiting 2 more bookstores with her detailed list. The bookfinder, Margaret, had responded immediately, asking for more specifics about the grandmother's collection and promising to put out feelers among her network. On the 4th morning, Emily's phone chimed while she was forcing herself through a polite breakfast with her mother. "Good news?" her mother asked, noticing Emily's sudden attention to her phone. Emily hesitated. She hadn't told her parents about her search, just a friend from Rehab checking in. The message was from an unfamiliar number. "Found something you might be interested in. Corner of Market and 7th, yesterday's books. Ask for Tomas." Margaret. Emily made an excuse about needing fresh air, an exercise part of her recovery routine. She explained and left before her mother could offer to accompany her. The bookstore was a 30-minute walk, but Emily welcomed the physical activity. Her legs still ached sometimes, especially in damp weather, but the pain was manageable without medication. Yesterday's books was tucked between a coffee shop and a vintage clothing store. Its narrow storefront, easy to miss. A bell, similar to the one at Bookmart, announced her arrival. The shop was empty except for a young man with thick glasses and a sleeve of literary tattoos arranging books on a display table. "I'm looking for Tomas," Emily said. "That's me." He didn't look up from his task. "You, Margaret's client? The one looking for the stolen books?" Emily blinked. "They weren't stolen, exactly, sold without consent of the owner. Sounds like stealing to me." He finally looked at her. "Margaret said you're particularly interested in a poetry collection that belonged to your grandmother." "Yes." Emily felt a surge of hope. "Did you find it?" "Not the whole collection." Tomas gestured for her to follow him to the back of the store. "But I found this at an estate sale in Queens last weekend." He reached under the counter and carefully placed a book on the surface between them. Emily's breath caught. The faded blue cloth cover, the slight water stain on the bottom corner, the gold lettering nearly worn away. She would have recognized it anywhere. "Collected Poems of Christina Rossetti, 1904 edition," Tomas said unnecessarily. "Property of Elizabeth Marlowe," according to the inscription. Elizabeth Marlowe, her grandmother's name in her grandmother's handwriting. Emily reached for the book with trembling fingers, opening it to the flyleaf where, sure enough, her grandmother's elegant script declared ownership, dated Christmas 1957. This was hers, Emily whispered. "How books have a way of traveling," Tomas said. The seller didn't know its provenance, just part of a lot he'd bought from another dealer who'd gotten it from someone else. "Margaret recognized your grandmother's name from the description. You sent her." Emily carefully turned the pages, finding her grandmother's familiar pencil marks in the margin, small stars, brief comments, question marks beside difficult passages. The book even smelled the same, that particular combination of paper and age and lilac perfume. "How much?" she asked, already reaching for her wallet. Tomas named a figure that was high but fair for a book of its age and condition. Emily paid without hesitation. "I'm still looking for the others," Tomas assured her. "Margaret's good at what she does. If they're in circulation, she'll track them down." Emily cradled the book as she left the store, too emotional to even consider browsing further. Outside, she found a bench and simply held the volume in her lap, overwhelmed by the miracle of this small reunion. Opening the book to a random page, she found a poem her grandmother had marked with a double star. "Remember" by Christina Rossetti, a poem about memory and loss and the comfort of being remembered. Emily read it through blurry eyes, hearing her grandmother's voice in the cadence of the lines. Walking home, she kept the book in her hands, unwilling to put it in her bag where she couldn't see or touch it. One book recovered out of hundreds lost, but not just any book. This connection to her grandmother felt like a sign, a confirmation that her search mattered. When she arrived home, her mother was waiting, concern etched on her face. "Where have you been? You were gone for hours. We agreed you'd keep to a predictable schedule during early recovery." Emily held up the book. "I found one of grandmother's poetry collections. Her mother's expression shifted from concern to wariness. Emily, don't worry, I'm not going to make a scene. Emily's voice was steady. I just thought you should know that I'm finding them. The books you sold, I'm getting them back, one by one. She went to her room before her mother could respond, placing the carefully on her shelf beside the other recovered volumes. Then she updated her spreadsheet, changing the status of this particular entry from missing to found, adding details about its condition and the circumstances of its recovery. As she worked, her phone chimed with an email notification. Liam Richardson had finally responded, brief but not unkind. I did indeed purchase a collection of poetry volumes from a private seller in March. Happy to discuss further. But I should note that I am a collector, not a dealer. I rarely sell items once they've entered my library. L. Richardson. Emily read the message 3 times, formulating and discarding various responses. The bookseller's warning about Richardson's attachment to his collection gave her pause. A direct appeal might backfire. Instead, she crafted a careful reply. Thank you for your response. I understand the attachment a true collector feels toward their acquisitions. I'm not necessarily looking to purchase, but rather to see these volumes again. They belonged to my grandmother and hold significant sentimental value. Perhaps I could view them at your convenience. Emily Marlowe. She hit send, then added Richardson's response to her notes. Another small step forward. The Rossetti volume sat on her shelf, a tangible reminder that not everything was lost forever. Some things could be found again, if you knew where to look. We thought a proper family dinner would be nice, her father announced on Sunday morning. Jennifer and David are bringing the kids, 7 o'clock. It wasn't a request. In the week since Emily's return, her parents had carefully maintained the fiction that everything was normal, that the empty library was just a renovation, that Emily's growing collection of recovered books was a charming hobby rather than a desperate reclamation project. Emily had found 3 more books. Through Margaret's network, a signed Atwood novel, a first edition McTuan, and a paperback Fitzgerald she'd annotated extensively in college. Each recovery had given her a small burst of joy, a momentary feeling of control in a situation largely beyond her influence. Richardson had agreed to a meeting the following week. His collection was in his home upstate, he explained, and he was currently traveling. The delay was frustrating but gave Emily time to consider her approach. She'd need to be persuasive. The books were legally his now, regardless of how they'd come into his possession. Emily spent the afternoon at a coffee shop, using their Wi-Fi to search online marketplaces for listings that might match her missing volumes. She'd found a few possibilities and sent inquiries, careful not to reveal too much about her situation. The search was becoming all-consuming, but Dr. Winters had cautioned her during their weekly call to maintain balance. Recovery isn't just about sobriety, the therapist had reminded her. It's about building a sustainable life. But how could she build anything when so much of her foundation had been dismantled? Emily returned home an hour before dinner to find her mother in a flurry of preparation. Her father setting the dining table with the good china they usually reserved for holidays. There you are, her mother said, wiping her hands on her apron. Could you help with the salad? Emily complied wordlessly, washing lettuce and slicing vegetables with mechanical precision. Her mother filled the silence with chatter about Jennifer's children, about a new recipe she was trying, about everything except what occupied Emily's thoughts. Jennifer arrived with her family precisely at 7, her husband David carrying a bottle of wine that he presented with a flourish. Non-alcoholic, he announced, with a significant glance at Emily. For our guest of honor. Emily forced a smile, thoughtful. Her niece and nephew dutifully hugged her before disappearing into the living room with their tablets. Jennifer inspected Emily with the clinical eye of an older sister. You look good, she declared. Healthy. How's it feel to be home? Before Emily could formulate a diplomatic answer, their mother called everyone to the table. Emily found herself seated between her father and brother-in-law, directly across from Jennifer, whose smile never quite reached her eyes. The meal progressed with practiced politeness. Emily answered questions about her recovery in generalities, deflected inquiries about her plans, and pushed food around her plate. The conversation flowed around her like water around a stone, until dessert. So, David said, leaning back in his chair, your parents told us about the little book project you've started. Emily set down her fork. Project. Trying to track down some of your old books. He waved a hand dismissively. Jennifer and I were talking. and we think it might not be the healthiest focus right now. Emily looked at her sister, who had the grace to appear slightly uncomfortable. I just meant, Jennifer clarified, that perhaps focusing on the future would be more productive than dwelling on the past. Dwelling. Emily repeated the word carefully. Is that what you call trying to recover what was taken from me? An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Her father cleared his throat. No one took anything from you, Emily. We made a decision about unused possessions while maintaining your apartment and paying your bills during your absence. Unused. Emily's voice rose slightly. Those books were the most used things I owned. They were just things, her mother interrupted gently. And you should be grateful we kept your apartment at all. Do you know how expensive that was? Emily stared at her mother. I never asked you to pay my rent. I had savings, which wouldn't have lasted 3 months, her father pointed out. Not with the medical bills. So, you sold my books to cover expenses. I never asked you to take on. The pieces clicked into place. You didn't even need the money from the sale, did you? You just wanted them gone, David interjected. I think what everyone's trying to say is that you should be focusing on your recovery, not some obsessive treasure hunt. Don't use that word, Emily said sharply. Obsessive. You have no idea what these books meant to me. They're objects, Emily, Jennifer said with exaggerated patience. Objects that were taking over your life. Maybe this is an opportunity to develop some healthier interests. Emily looked around the table at these people who claimed to love her, but had never bothered to understand her. Who could dismiss her passion as obsession, her pain as overreaction, her identity as something in need of correction? You know what's not healthy, she said quietly. Selling someone's most precious possessions without their consent, and then telling them they should be grateful for it. Emily, her mother began. No. Emily stood, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. You don't get to decide what matters to me. You don't get to decide what's healthy for me. And you certainly don't get to pretend you did me a favor by erasing the thing I cared about most. David scoffed. It's not like they burned your photo albums. They were just books. Just books, Emily echoed. She looked at her brother-in-law with something approaching pity. You really don't understand, do you? None of you do. Her father's expression hardened. What we understand is that you're acting like an ungrateful child. After everything we've done, what you've done is show me exactly how little you respect me, Emily interrupted. How little you know me after 32 years. She pushed away from the table. Thank you for dinner. I think I need some air. Outside the spring evening was cool and clear. Emily walked aimlessly, her thoughts churning. The conversation replayed in her mind, each dismissive comment driving home how fundamentally disconnected she was from her family. The realization wasn't new, but its clarity was. They would never understand why the books mattered. They would never acknowledge the harm they'd done. In their minds, they had helped her streamline her life, removed a distraction, covered her expenses, and they expected gratitude. Emily found herself at a small park several blocks from her parents' apartment. Sitting on a bench, she pulled out her phone and opened the spreadsheet that had become her lifeline. 44 books recovered, hundreds still missing. The numbers felt suddenly overwhelming. Her thumb hovered over Dr. Winter's contact information. Instead, she navigated 2 rental listings. It was time to consider a more permanent solution than recovering scattered pieces of her past. She needed to build something new entirely. Liam Richardson's home was a converted farmhouse 2 hours north of the city. Emily had rented a car for the day, using a significant portion of her dwindling savings. The drive gave her time to rehearse different approaches, appealing to sentiment, offering to buy back specific volumes, proposing some kind of shared custody arrangement that sounded absurd even in her head. In the week since the disastrous family dinner, Emily had found 6 more books through Margaret's network and online marketplaces. She'd also signed a lease on a small studio apartment across town. Using the security deposit she'd reclaimed from her previous landlord, her parents hadn't taken the news of her imminent departure well, but Emily had remained firm. She needed her own space. She explained a fresh start. They had nodded as if they understood, willfully ignoring that this fresh start was necessitated by their actions. The farmhouse appeared around a bend in the road. White clapboard with green shutters and a wraparound porch. Emily parked behind a sensible sedan and took a moment to collect herself. The Rossetti volume was in her bag, a talisman of sorts, a physical reminder of what she was fighting to reclaim. Richardson answered on the first tall thing. Man in his 60s with wire-rimmed glasses and a cardigan, despite the warm spring day. He looked exactly like a rare book collector should look, Emily thought with an unexpected flash of humor. Double quotes, Ms. Marlowe. He extended a hand. Liam Richardson, please come in. The interior of the farmhouse had been extensively renovated, with several walls removed to create an open living area dominated by floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. Emily's breath caught at the sight, not just at the impressive collection, but at the painful reminder of her own lost library. Quite a collection, she managed. Richardson smiled slightly, the result of 40 years of careful acquisition. But you're not here to admire my library as a whole. He led her to a specific section where a dozen volumes stood together on a shelf. At eye level, Emily recognized them immediately: her grandmother's poetry collection, the books she had inherited at 17 and carried through every move, every life change. These are the volumes I acquired in March, Richardson confirmed. 11 books, all poetry, all previously owned by Elizabeth Marlowe according to the inscriptions. My grandmother, Emily said quietly. So you mentioned in your email. Richardson studied her. You said they were sold without your consent. Emily explained briefly the accident, the rehabilitation, her parents' decision. Richardson listened without interruption, his expression thoughtful. A troubling situation, he said when she finished. However, I did purchase these books legally, through what appeared to be a legitimate estate sale. I know. Emily reached into her bag and withdrew the Rossetti volume. I found this one at another shop. I was hoping... I don't know what I was hoping. Richardson took the book carefully, examining the inscription, the marginal notes, the companion to these others. He returned it to her. You've gone to considerable effort to recover these books. They're the most important things I own. Emily looked at the shelf where her grandmother's books stood, or owned. Richardson gestured to an armchair. Please, sit. Would you like tea? The conversation that followed was not what Emily had expected. Richardson asked about her grandmother, who she was, her relationship with books, how the collection had come to Emily. He listened attentively as Emily described receiving the books after her grandmother's death, how they had formed the foundation of her own library, how she had added to them over the years. So these 11 volumes were part of a much larger collection, Richardson said, gesturing to his shelves. Just as these are part of mine. Yes. Emily's throat tightened. But these particular books, they're not just any books to me. Richardson was silent for a long moment. I've been collecting rare and meaningful books for 40 years, Ms. Marlowe. Each acquisition is carefully considered, each volume valued not just for its monetary worth but for its place in the collection as a whole. I don't part with books once they've entered my library. Emily's heart sank. She had expected this response, but hearing it stated so definitively still hurt. I understand, she said, rising. Thank you for letting me see them, at least. I haven't finished. Richardson remained seated. While I don't sell books from my collection, there have been rare occasions when I've recognized that a particular volume has greater meaning to someone else than it could ever have to me. Hope fluttered in Emily's chest. What are you saying? I'm saying that I need to consider the situation carefully. He stood and walked to the shelf, removing one of the poetry volumes, a slender book of Dickinson poems that had been her grandmother's favorite. This collection is worth significantly more than what I paid for it. These are rare editions in excellent condition. I know their value, Emily said, both market value and personal value. Indeed. Richardson examined the Dickinson thoughtfully, which is why I find myself in an ethical quandary. As a collector, I value the integrity of my library. As a human being, I recognize the unusual circumstances of this acquisition. He returned the book to the shelf. I need to consider this situation. Would you be willing to return in a week? I'll have my decision then. It wasn't the resolution Emily had hoped for, but it was more promising than an outright refusal. Of course. Thank you for considering it. As she prepared to leave, Richardson gestured to the Rossetti in her hand. That was your grandmother's favorite, one of them, Emily confirmed. She loved the romantics, especially. Richardson nodded thoughtfully. My mother was partial to Wordsworth. I inherited her collection when she passed my first rare books. The beginning of all this. He waved a hand at his extensive library. On the drive back to the city, Emily tried not to hope too much. Richardson hadn't promised anything specific, but he had listened, had seemed to understand the significance of the books beyond their monetary value. That was more than her own family had done. She had a week to wait for his decision. In the meantime, she had an apartment to furnish, a life to rebuild. The small collection of recovered books now, numbering 53, would come with her to the new space, not enough to fill even one bookshelf, but a start. As she drove, Emily found herself reciting from memory a poem from her grandmother's Rossetti volume, the one marked with a double star, about remembering and being remembered. Perhaps that was the real value of the books, not the objects themselves, but the memories they contained, the connections they preserved. But even as she thought it, she knew it wasn't entirely true. The books themselves mattered, the physical objects, the specific editions, the marginalia in her grandmother's handwriting. These things couldn't be replaced by memory alone. They were artifacts of a shared history, tangible links to the person who had first shown her the power of literature. She would wait a week for Richardson's decision. And then, regardless of the outcome, she would continue building something new from what remained. Emily was halfway back to the city when Richardson called. "Ms. Marlowe, there's something I neglected to mention," he said without preamble. "One of your grandmother's books, a Blake collection, has some loose pages. I'd intended to have it repaired, but if you're interested in these volumes, you might want to consult a bookbinder yourself." "I appreciate the concern," Emily said carefully, "but I haven't assumed you're selling them to me." "No," Richardson agreed, "but I thought you should know the condition regardless. Safe travels." The call left Emily unsettled. Was it a positive sign that Richardson was thinking about the book's care, or was he simply being thorough about his collection? She arrived back at her parents' apartment emotionally drained. The empty library, now nearly transformed into a sitting room with a television and armchairs, seemed to mock her as she passed. In her bedroom, she carefully placed the Rossetti with her other recovered books and updated her spreadsheet, noting the meeting with Richardson and his promise of a decision in a week. Her mother knocked on the door as Emily was changing for bed. "How was your drive?" she asked, hovering in the doorway. "Fine," Emily said, not volunteering information about her destination or purpose. Her mother's gaze drifted to the small bookshelf, now half filled with recovered volumes. "Another book?" Emily shook her head. "No new ones today. Just following up on a lead." Emily ... double quotes. Her mother stepped into the room. "Your father and I are worried about you. This fixation isn't healthy," Emily continued, changing, refusing to engage with the familiar criticism. "We've been talking," her mother continued. "We think it might be good for you to see someone, a therapist who specializes in—" "I already have a therapist," Emily interrupted. "Dr. Winters, from the rehabilitation center. But someone local, someone who could help you move past this book situation." Emily turned to face her mother. "It's not a situation. You sold my property without my permission. I'm trying to recover what I can, but it's consuming you," her mother insisted. "You spend all day hunting for these books. You barely talk to us. You're moving out after we've done everything to help." "Everything except respect me," Emily said quietly. "Everything except understand what mattered to me." Her mother's expression hardened slightly. "What matters is your recovery, your future, not dwelling on material possessions from the past." The familiar dismissal ignited something in Emily's chest. "Stop telling me what should matter to me. You don't get to decide that. We're your parents." "I'm 32 years old." Emily's voice rose. "I'm an adult who had a life, an identity, before the accident, before rehab, and you erased part of that identity because you decided it wasn't important." Her mother stepped back, surprised by the outburst. "We were trying to help." "No," Emily cut her off. "You were trying to fix me, to make me into someone who doesn't care about books, who doesn't waste space on things you don't value." "But that's not who I am." She grabbed her purse. "I need some air." "It's late," her mother protested. "Where are you going?" Emily didn't answer, rushing past her mother and out of the apartment. The night air was cool against her flushed skin as she walked aimlessly, no destination in mind except away. She found herself at a small hotel several blocks from her parents' apartment. The lobby was deserted except for a bored-looking desk clerk who barely glanced up as Emily approached. "Do you have any rooms available?" The price was exorbitant for what was essentially a clean but basic room. Emily hesitated only briefly before handing over her credit card. One night, she could afford one night away from the suffocating atmosphere of her parents' apartment. In the room, Emily sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the generic watercolor on the wall. The interaction with her mother replayed in her mind, along with the meeting with Richardson, the family dinner, every moment, since returning home to find her library gone. It's consuming you, her mother had said. Was that true? Was her search for the books becoming obsessive, unhealthy? Dr. Winters had warned about replacing one dependency with another. Recovery means finding balance, she'd said during their last session. But how could Emily find balance when she felt so fundamentally off, when such a significant part of her life had been erased? She pulled out her phone to check her email, another habitual action in her constant search for leads. There was a new message from Margaret, the bookfinder, with a promising lead on a first edition Emily had listed. Before opening it, Emily paused. Then, instead of checking the email, she called Dr. Winters. "Emily," the therapist answered, sounding surprised. "It's quite late. Is everything all right?" "No," Emily admitted, her voice breaking. "I don't think it is." The story poured out of her: the confrontation with her mother, the meeting with Richardson, the growing sense that she was losing herself in the search for her books. "I feel like I'm drowning," she concluded, "like I'm trying to rebuild something that can't be rebuilt, but I don't know how to stop." Dr. Winters was silent for a moment. "Do you want to stop?" The question caught Emily off guard. I don't know. The books were so important to me." "Are important," Dr. Winters corrected gently. "They still matter. To you, Emily, that's not wrong or unhealthy in itself. But my mother says, your mother doesn't get to decide what matters to you." Dr. Winters echoed Emily's own words. "Neither do I, for that matter. Only you can determine what's significant in your life." Emily wiped at tears she hadn't realized were falling. "Then why does it feel like I'm doing something wrong? Like I'm failing at recovery by focusing on this?" "Because recovery isn't linear," Dr. Winters said, "and because you're trying to navigate a significant loss while also maintaining your sobriety, rebuilding your life, and managing family relationships that are clearly strained." The simple validation released something in Emily's chest. She sobbed, a deep, wrenching sound that seemed to come from somewhere beneath her ribs. "I miss my books," she managed between breaths. "I miss who I was with them." "I know," Dr. Winters said softly. "That's a legitimate loss to grieve. But remember, Emily, you're still you. With or without the physical books, you're still the person who loves literature, who finds meaning in stories, who carries those words inside you." Emily cried until she had no tears left, clutching the phone like a lifeline. Dr. Winters remained on the line, a steady presence in the storm of Emily's emotions. "What do I do now?" Emily asked finally, her voice raw. "Tonight, you rest," Dr. Winters said. "Tomorrow, you continue making choices that support your well-being, including deciding what role this search for your books will play in your life moving forward." After they hung up, Emily lay on the hotel bed, emotionally spent, but somehow lighter. For the first time since discovering her empty library, she allowed herself to consider the possibility that she might never recover all. Her books might never rebuild what had been lost. And yet, she would still be Emily, changed, perhaps, scarred, certainly, but still herself at her core. Emily returned to her parents' apartment the next morning to find her father waiting. His expression a mix of concern and frustration. "Your mother was worried sick," he said by way of greeting. "You can't just disappear like that, not after everything." "I needed space," Emily replied, moving past him toward her bedroom. "I stayed at a hotel." "A hotel," he followed her. "Emily, that's not what?" She turned to face him. "Not sensible, not financially responsible. I'm aware, but it was necessary." Her father studied her face. "You've been crying." "Yes." She didn't elaborate. A moment of uncomfortable silence stretched between them before her father sighed. "Your mother mentioned you're upset about the books again." "Still," Emily corrected, "I'm still upset about the books. It's not something I'm going to just get over because you think I should." She entered her bedroom and began pulling her suitcase from the closet. Her father watched from the doorway. "What are you doing?" "Packing." Emily began methodically folding clothes. "I found an apartment. The lease starts next week. But I think it's better if I move to a hotel until then." "Because of an argument with your mother?" Her father's voice held disbelief. "Emily, that's an overreaction. It's not about one argument." Emily continued packing. "It's about the fact that I can't heal in a place where my feelings and priorities are constantly dismissed, where the people who should understand me best don't even try to." Her father was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter. "We were trying to help, Emily. We thought We thought the books were part of the problem. Emily paused, looking up at him. What problem? Your isolation. He struggled for words. Your tendency to retreat into books instead of dealing with real life. The accusation stung precisely because it contained a grain of truth. Emily had always found solace in literature, had sometimes preferred fictional worlds to the real one, but that wasn't the whole story. Books weren't my escape from life, she said carefully. They were how I engaged with it, how I processed experiences, how I connected with ideas and emotions and possibilities. She resumed packing. But you never saw that, did you? You just saw shelves taking up space, objects collecting dust. They were everywhere, Emily, her father said, a defensive note entering his voice. Every surface, every wall. It wasn't normal. It was normal for me. Emily zipped the suitcase closed. And even if you couldn't understand it, you could have respected it. Respected me enough to at least ask before selling my possessions. Her father had no response to that. Emily surveyed the room, mentally cataloging what she'd need immediately versus what could wait. The 50-some recovered books would come with her, of course. Everything else could be moved later, once she was settled in the new apartment. I'll arrange for movers next week, she said, pulling the suitcase off the bed. For the rest of my things, her father stepped aside as she wheeled the suitcase past him. In the hallway, she paused, realizing she hadn't told him about her meeting with Richardson. I found the man who bought grandmother's poetry collection, she said. He's considering returning them to me. Something flickered across her father's face. Surprise, perhaps, or grudging respect. That's good, I suppose. It is good, Emily. Confirmed. Those books matter to me. I wish that mattered to you. In the kitchen, she wrote down the address of her new apartment and her move-in date, leaving the note on the counter. Her mother was nowhere to be seen, probably in the bedroom, avoiding another confrontation. Emily felt a pang of regret, not for leaving but for the distance that had grown between them, a distance that had existed long before the books were sold. If she was honest with herself, her parents had never really understood her, had always treated her love of literature as a phase to outgrow, a quirk to tolerate. The accident and its aftermath had simply revealed the fault lines that had always been there. Outside, Emily called a rideshare to take her to a hotel near her new apartment. As she waited, she checked her email, finding a response from Richardson that made her breath catch. I've given considerable thought to our conversation, he wrote. While I maintain that my purchase was legitimate, I recognize the unique circumstances. I am prepared to discuss a potential arrangement regarding your grandmother's collection when you return next week. It wasn't a definitive answer, but it was promising. Emily felt a flutter of hope as she climbed into the car that arrived moments later. The hotel was basic, but clean. Similar to where she'd stayed the previous night. Emily unpacked only what she'd need for the week clothes, toiletries, her laptop, and the recovered books, which she arranged carefully on the desk and nightstand, transforming the impersonal room into something approaching a temporary home. Sitting on the bed, Emily opened her spreadsheet and made several changes. Instead of categorizing books simply as missing or found, she created a new column, Priority. In this column, she marked which books were truly irreplaceable to her, the ones with sentimental value beyond their monetary worth, the ones with her grandmother's handwriting or her own extensive annotations, the ones that had helped her through difficult times. About 100 books, out of the more than 800 she'd lost, fell into this category. The rest, while still meaningful, could perhaps be replaced with similar editions, or accepted as gong. It was a compromise with herself, a way of focusing her search while acknowledging that a complete restoration of her library might not be possible. After finishing the spreadsheet, Emily called the rehabilitation center and asked to schedule an extra session with Dr. Winters. Then she contacted Margaret, the bookfinder, to update her on the priority list. I can't chase every book, she explained, but these 100 or so, they're the ones that matter most. Smart, Margaret approved. More manageable target. I'll focus my network on these specifically. That evening, Emily walked to her new apartment building and stood outside, looking up at the windows of what would soon be her home. It was smaller than her previous place, with less built-in storage and no dedicated space for a library. But it was hers, a fresh start, a blank page. As she stood there, Emily realized she was making a choice. Not to forget or abandon her search, but to place it in a more balanced context within her life, to remember that she was more than the books she owned. more than the collection she'd lost. She was still Emily Reader, thinker, survivor, and perhaps it was time to start writing a new chapter. The week passed in a blur of practical activities. Emily viewed furniture she could afford, scheduled utilities for her new apartment, and continued her therapy sessions with Dr. Winters. The book search continued, but with less frantic energy, a focused project rather than an all-consuming mission. Margaret found 3 more volumes from the priority list, including a beloved paperback edition of Middlemarch that Emily had read during her semester abroad in London, its margins filled with her 20-year-old thoughts and observations. Holding it again felt like reconnecting with a younger version of herself, a self that existed independently of her recent trauma and recovery. The night before her second meeting with Richardson, Emily sat in her hotel room with her laptop open to a blank document. She had been thinking about what to say to him, how to articulate what the books meant to her without sounding desperate or entitled. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, she found herself writing a different letter entirely. "Dear Mom and Dad," she typed, then stared at the screen for several minutes before continuing. "I'm writing because there are things I need to say that seem to get lost or twisted when we try to talk in person. Things about the books, yes, but also about our relationship and what has happened over these past months. First, I want to acknowledge what you did right. You supported me financially during rehabilitation. You kept my apartment when I couldn't. You were there physically during a difficult time, and I am grateful for that support. But I need you to understand what went wrong. 2. When you sold my books without asking me, when you dismissed them as just things or clutter, you weren't just getting rid of objects. You were making decisions about my life, my identity, my values. You were deciding what should and shouldn't matter to me, and in doing so, you were saying that you know me better than I know myself. The truth is, you don't. You never have. And that's not entirely your fault. I've never been good at explaining why books matter so much to me. So let me try now. Books have been my constant companions since grandmother first taught me to read. When I was lonely as a child, and I was often lonely, though you might not have noticed, books were my friends. When I was struggling to understand the world, books helped me make sense of it. When I was in pain, physical pain after the accident, emotional pain during recovery, books reminded me that suffering can have meaning, that darkness doesn't last forever. My library wasn't just a collection of objects. It was a physical manifestation of my inner life. Each book represented a part of my journey, a piece of who I am and how I've grown. When you sold them, you weren't just clearing space or generating extra cash. You were erasing visible evidence of my experiences, my thoughts, my development as a person. I understand that you may never fully comprehend what these books meant to me. We value different things, and that's okay. But respect doesn't require complete understanding. It just requires acknowledging that someone else's feelings and priorities are valid, even when they differ from your own. I'm not writing this to make you feel guilty or to demand apologies. I'm writing because I'm trying to move forward with my life in a healthy way, and that means being honest with myself and with Ua about what happened and how it affected me. I've found a new apartment and will be moving in tomorrow, recovered some of my books, and am making peace with the loss of others. I'm continuing my recovery journey, finding balance and building a life that reflects who I am, which is both the same as and different from who I was before the accident. What I hope for our relationship moving forward is simple: respect. Respect for my choices, my values, my autonomy as an adult. I hope we can rebuild trust over time, but that will require changes from all of us. From me, more openness about what I'm feeling and thinking. From you, more willingness to accept that my life may look different from what you envisioned for me, and that's not a failure or a problem to be fixed. I love you both. That hasn't changed, but how we relate to each other needs to change if we're going to have a healthy relationship moving forward. I'll be in touch once I'm settled in my new place. Emily. She read through the letter twice, making small edits. It was honest without being cruel, firm without being vindictive. It said what needed to be said. Emily saved the document, then printed it using the hotel's business center. She folded the pages carefully and placed them in an envelope, addressing it by hand. She wouldn't deliver it yet. Tomorrow was her meeting with Richardson, and she needed to focus on that conversation first. But having written the letter, having articulated her feelings so clearly, gave her a sense of resolution that had been missing since she first discovered her empty library. The next morning, Emily drove back to Richardson's farmhouse with a lighter heart and clearer purpose. She had decided on her approach. She would be honest about what the books meant to her, but also respectful of Richardson as a fellow collector. She would propose a fair price for the volumes that mattered most to her grandmother's poetry collection and, accept whatever decision he made. Richardson greeted her at the door with unexpected warmth. "Ms. Marlowe, please come in. I've been looking forward to our conversation." The farmhouse was just as she remembered, the walls of books both achingly familiar and slightly intimidating. Richardson led her to the same sitting area as before, where tea was already prepared. "I've given our previous discussion considerable thought," he began, pouring tea for both of them, "and I've come to a decision that I hope will satisfy us both." Emily nodded, waiting. "These books," Richardson gestured to the shelf where her grandmother's collection sat, "are valuable additions to my library. As I mentioned, I rarely part with books once they've entered my collection." Emily's heart sank, but she maintained her composure. "However," Richardson continued, "I find myself in an unusual situation. The circumstances of my acquisition, while legally sound, raise ethical questions I can't ignore." He set down his teacup. "I won't sell you these books, Ms. Marlowe." Emily swallowed her disappointment. "I understand. Thank you for considering. You misunderstand me," Richardson interrupted gently. "I won't sell them to you because I'm returning them to you." Emily stared at him, certain she had misheard. "Returning them?" "Yes." Richardson's expression was serious. "With one condition, that you allow me to properly repair the Blake volume before you take it. The restoration will take about a month." "Why?" Emily managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why would you give them back?" Richardson was quiet for a moment. "Because they were never truly mine to begin with," he said finally. "Because 40 years of collecting has taught me that books sometimes have destinies of their own. And because I recognized something in you when you spoke about your grandmother, something I felt when my mother passed and left me her books." He stood and walked to the shelf, removing the volumes one by one and placing them carefully in a box he had prepared. "These belong with you, Ms. Marlowe. They're part of your story in a way they could never be part of mine." Emily watched in stunned silence as Richardson packed the books, her grandmother's books, her books, with the careful hands of someone who understood their value beyond their price. Dawn was breaking as Emily finished packing the last of her belongings. The apartment was quiet, her parents still asleep, unaware that this would be the last time she woke up under their roof. She had decided against a formal goodbye. There had been too many tense conversations already, too many words that missed their mark. The letter she had written sat on the kitchen counter alongside her set of keys, final but not dramatic, honest but not cruel. It was the best she could offer right now. Emily moved silently through the rooms, checking drawers and closets one last time. In the bathroom, she left the expensive shampoo her mother had bought for her, a small, petty gesture that she immediately regretted but didn't correct. Old habits of passive resistance died hard. In what had once been her library, now fully converted to a sitting room with no trace of bookshelves, Emily paused. The room still felt wrong to her, on amputation, a erasure. But the sharp pain of that first discovery had dulled to a persistent ache. Not healed, but healing. The box containing her grandmother's poetry collection, minus the Blake volume that Richardson was having restored, sat by the door alongside her suitcase and the smaller box of previously recovered books. Together, they represented perhaps a tenth of what she had lost, but they were the heart of it, the essential core. Emily loaded everything into the rental car in 2 trips, careful not to make noise that might wake her parents. The early morning air was cool and damp, the streets empty except for delivery trucks and early commuters. She felt a strange sense of déjà vu. She just returned home, hopeful and expectant, mere weeks ago. But she wasn't the same person who had come back from rehabilitation. That Emily had been fragile, uncertain, clinging to the idea that returning to her old life would somehow complete her recovery. This Emily understood that recovery wasn't about returning to what was, but about building what could be. Before driving to her new apartment, Emily made one unplanned stop. The cemetery was just opening as she arrived, the gates newly unlocked, by a groundskeeper who nodded to her as she passed. She knew the route to her grandmother's grave by heart, though she hadn't visited since before the accident. The simple headstone bore just her grandmother's name, Elizabeth Marlowe, and the dates of her birth and death. No epitaph, no poetry. Her grandmother had considered such additions pretentious nonsense. Emily smiled at the memory of her grandmother's practical nature, so at odds with her love of romantic poetry. "I got your books back," Emily said quietly, kneeling beside the grave. "Well, most of them. The Blake is being repaired." A morning breeze rustled the new leaves overhead. "I'm starting over," Emily continued. "New apartment, new beginning. It's scary, but also, right, somehow." She traced her grandmother's name on the cool stone. "You always said books were doorways. I think maybe losing them opened a different kind of door for me." She remained there for several minutes, not speaking, just being present with the memory of the woman who had first placed books in her hands, who had shown her that stories could be companions and guides and refuges. "I miss you," she said finally, standing. "I always will, but I carry you with min memories, in the books we shared, in the person I've become because of you." The drive to her new apartment took her through neighborhoods she knew well, and others she had rarely visited. The building was in a quieter part of the city than her previous apartment, an older area with tree-lined streets and small local businesses instead of chain stores. The apartment itself was on the third floor, a studio with large windows that filled the space with morning light. Emily had signed the lease sight unseen, relying on photos and the assurance of the realtor that it was cozy but well maintained. Now, standing in the empty space, she felt a flutter of uncertainty. It was small, much smaller than her previous one-bedroom. Where would she put bookshelves when she eventually rebuilt her collection? But as she placed the box of her grandmother's poetry books on the windowsill, the first item to find a home in the new space, the apartment already felt more like hers than her parents' place ever had. The movers she had hired arrived precisely at 8, two efficient young men, who carried up the few pieces of furniture she had purchased: a bed, a small dining table with 2 chairs, a desk, and, most importantly, 2 bookshelves. Not enough to house a significant collection, but enough for now, enough to start by noon. The apartment was minimally furnished. Emily stood in the center, turning slowly to take it all in. So much empty space, so many blank walls, a canvas waiting for the story she would create here. Her phone chimed with a text from Dr. Winters. "Moving day. How are you feeling?" Emily considered the question. How was she feeling? Exhausted from the early start and physical effort, anxious about the financial strain of rent and new furniture, sad about the distance, physical and emotional, that now separated her from her family. But underneath those surface emotions was something steadier, calmer, something like peace. "I'm feeling present," she texted back, "right where I need to be." Dr. Winters responded with a simple thumbs-up emoji so uncharacteristic that Emily laughed out loud, the sound echoing slightly in the sparsely furnished space. Later, as evening approached, Emily carefully arranged her recovered books on one of the new bookshelves. 67 volumes now, including her grandmother's poetry collection. The shelf was less than half full, with wide gaps between clusters of books, but Emily didn't see the gaps as empty spaces. She saw them as room to grow, as possibilities, as the beginning of something new rather than the remnant of something lost. She placed her grandmother's Rossetti volume in the center of the shelf, running her finger along its worn spine. Then she stepped back, surveying her new home, small but hers, sparse but full of potential. Outside her window, the city continued its endless motion. Inside, in this quiet space that belonged only to her, Emily felt herself beginning to move forward. The first week in her new apartment passed in a blur of small adjustments and practical concerns. Emily established routines: morning coffee by the window, evening walks around her new neighborhood, regular check-ins with Dr. Winters. She applied for jobs at local businesses, knowing her savings wouldn't last forever. On her third day of job hunting, Emily found herself standing outside Landmark Books, a small independent bookstore 6 blocks from her apartment. She hadn't specifically sought it out. Her feet had simply carried her there during an afternoon walk. Now, staring at the hand-painted sign and the display of new releases in the window, she felt a mixture of longing and hesitation. Since losing her library, Emily had avoided bookstores, except when actively searching for her missing volumes. Being surrounded by books she couldn't afford to buy had seemed like unnecessary torture. But something about this particular store, perhaps the cat lounging in the window, or the mismatched armchairs visible through the glass, drew her in. A bell chimed softly as she entered. The scent hit her immediately: paper and binding glue, and the particular dust that accumulates only in places where books live. Emily's throat tightened with unexpected emotion. "Welcome to Landmark," called a voice from behind the counter. "Let me know if you need help finding anything." The speaker was a woman around Emily's age with bright red hair and cat-eye glasses. Her smile was genuine but not pushy, the perfect bookstore employee approach. "Actually," Emily found herself saying, "I was wondering if you're hiring." The woman, Diana, according to her name tag, looked surprised. "We might be. Our Saturday person just gave notice." "Do you have bookstore experience?" Emily shook her head. "Not professionally, but I know books." The understatement almost made her laugh. "I'm a reader." Diana smiled. "Aren't we all? Do you have a resume?" "Not with me. I can email one." "Even better. I'm the assistant manager, but Helen the owner does all the hiring." "I'll give you her email." As Diana wrote down the contact information, Emily browsed the nearest shelf. Poetry, arranged alphabetically by author. Her fingers itched to touch the spines, to pull volumes out and read random passages. She restrained herself, but not before noticing a familiar name, Christina Rossetti. "Beautiful editions," Diana commented, following Emily's gaze. "The poetry section is my personal project. I've been trying to expand it, but poetry's a hard sell these days." "Not to everyone," Emily said quietly, accepting the slip of paper. "With the owner's email, are you looking for anything specific today?" Diana asked. Emily considered the question. Was she? She certainly couldn't afford to buy books right now, not with her limited savings and no steady income. Yet being here, surrounded by books in a space that celebrated them, felt healing in a way she hadn't anticipated. "Just browsing," she said finally, "getting a feel for the place." Diana nodded, understanding. "Well, browse as long as you like. The armchairs are free, and we've got a self-serve coffee station in the back. $1 a cup on the honor system." Emily spent the next hour wandering the store, noting its organization, its carefully curated sections, its blend of new releases and classics. It was smaller than some bookstores but thoughtfully arranged, with handwritten staff recommendation cards and themed displays throughout. That evening, Emily sent her resume to Helen with a brief cover letter explaining her love of books and her need for a fresh start. She tried not to hope too much. Jobs at independent bookstores were coveted and rare, but the idea of working somewhere surrounded by books, of helping connect readers with stories, held undeniable appeal. To her surprise, Helen called the very next day. "Your resume is impressive," the owner said after introducing herself. "Advanced degree in comparative literature, fluent in 3 languages. You're overqualified to sell paperbacks." "If I'm being honest, I don't see it that way," Emily replied. "Books have always been central to my life. Working with them, talking about them with fellow readers, that's not beneath me. It's exactly what I want to be doing right now." Something in her tone must have convinced Helen, because 2 days later Emily found herself being trained on the store's inventory system by Diana, learning the rhythms and routines of bookselling. "The pay is terrible," Diana warned as she showed Emily how to process special orders, "but the employee discount almost makes up for it." Emily smiled, thinking of her sparse bookshelf at home. "That could be dangerous." "That's the idea," Diana winked. "We want booksellers who can't resist books." Makes for better recommendations. The work itself was straightforward: shelving, customer service, processing shipments, but Emily found unexpected satisfaction in each task, placing a book in a customer's hands, hearing their excitement about a new release or their attachment to an old favorite, discussing recommendations with her coworkers. All of it felt meaningful in a way that her previous office job never had. The end of her first week, Helen handed Emily her modest paycheck along with a book, a paperback edition of Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel. "First paycheck tradition," Helen explained. "We give each new employee a book we think they'll love." "Diana picked this one for you, said you two had talked about post-apocalyptic fiction." Emily accepted the book with a lump in her throat. It was such a small gesture, but it represented something profound: acceptance, welcome, a new beginning, centered around what she loved most. That night, Emily rearranged her bookshelf to make room for the new edition. Her collection now numbered 68 volumes, a far cry from the hundreds she had once owned, but no longer just fragments recovered from her past. This newest book represented something different. Not reclamation, but growth. Not looking back, but moving forward. As she placed it on the shelf, Emily realized that working at the bookstore was having another unexpected effect. Being surrounded by books she didn't own, thousands of them, more than she could ever have in her small apartment, was helping her separate the love of books from the ownership of them. She could still be a reader, still connect with literature and ideas, without possessing every volume that spoke to her. It wasn't that her lost library mattered less. Those books had been part of her history, physical manifestations of her journey, but perhaps her future relationship with books could be different, less about accumulation and more about connection, less about possession and more about participation. In the ongoing conversation between authors and readers that had sustained her throughout her life, Emily sat on her bed, looking at her small but growing collection. The shelf was still more empty than full, but where once those gaps had represented only loss, now they also held possibility. 6 months passed in a steady rhythm of small changes and gradual healing. Emily's job at Landmark Books had evolved from part-time to nearly full-time as Helen recognized her knowledge and commitment. Her apartment, once sparse and impersonal, had slowly taken on her personality: a comfortable armchair by the window, plants on the sill, art on the walls. Her bookshelf had grown too, though not at the frantic pace of her earlier collecting. Each edition was deliberate, meaningful books she truly loved or wanted to read, not acquired simply to fill space. Margaret still occasionally contacted her with leads on volumes from her original collection, and Emily sometimes pursued these, sometimes didn't. The urgency had faded, replaced by a more balanced approach to rebuilding. Communication with her parents remained minimal. They had responded to her letter with a brief, awkward phone call that had resolved nothing but at least acknowledged the breach. Emily spoke with them every few weeks, surface-level conversations that carefully avoided mention of books or the past. It wasn't healing, exactly, but it was a kind of truce. Her brother, Michael, had reached out separately after receiving his own copy of her letter. Though 5 years younger and living on the opposite coast, he had been surprisingly understanding. "They did the same thing with my baseball card collection when I was in college," he'd said during their first phone call. "Not the same scale, but the same disregard. I get it, I really do." That validation from an unexpected source had meant more than Emily could express. They now talked weekly, rebuilding a sibling relationship that had been neglected during their adult years. One rainy October morning, exactly 6 months after moving into her apartment, Emily received a notification for a package delivery. She wasn't expecting anything. Her birthday was months away, and she hadn't ordered anything online recently. The package waited in her building's lobby after Waka, medium-sized box with no return address, just her name and address printed in unfamiliar handwriting. Emily carried it upstairs with curious caution, setting it on her kitchen table while she changed out of her work clothes and made a cup of tea. The box was sealed with packing tape that required a knife to slice through. Inside, beneath layers of bubble wrap, was a book bound in worn green leather, its pages slightly yellowed with age. Emily's breath caught as she recognized it immediately. William Blake's Songs of Innocence and Experience, her grandmother's copy, the volume Richardson had been having restored. But it couldn't be from Richardson. He had already returned the Blake weeks ago. The restoration complete as promised. This was a different edition, entirely older, more valuable, in even better condition. A note card fell from between the pages as Emily opened the book. "Dear Ms. Marlowe, you may not remember me, but my name is Lawrence Richardson, Liam's father. I'm writing because my son passed away last month after a brief illness. While settling his affairs, I found his notes about your situation and this volume, which he had apparently purchased separately from the collection. He returned to you." Liam's note indicated that this was a first edition he had located to replace your grandmother's copy, which he felt was too damaged for proper restoration. He intended to give you both versions, your original for its sentimental value, and this one for its completeness and condition. As a book collector myself, I understand what these volumes can mean beyond their monetary value. I hope this edition brings you the same joy it brought my son in finding it for you. With sympathies and best wishes, Lawrence Richardson. Emily sat still, the book open in her lap, the note trembling slightly in her hand. Richardson had died, and he had gone to such lengths to find this replacement, this gift for someone he barely knew. The book itself was beautiful, true first edition of Blake's masterwork, with hand-colored plates that glowed with an almost supernatural vibrancy. It must have cost thousands, must have required significant effort to locate and purchase. Why would he do this? Their connection had been brief, their interaction limited to 2 meetings and a handful of emails. Yet something in their conversations, in their shared understanding of what books could mean, had prompted this extraordinary gesture. Emily carefully turned the pages, marveling at the craftsmanship, the artistry, the survival of something so delicate for so many years. Near the back, she found a small bookplate, elegantly designed but not yet filled in with a name. Another note in Richardson's hand was tucked beside it, "For your collection, as it grows again." The past and future bound together. Tears blurred Emily's vision as she traced the empty bookplate with her fingertip. Richardson had understood what she was trying to do, not just recover what was lost, but build something new that honored the past while creating space for the future. She carried the plate to her bookshelf and placed it carefully beside her grandmother's restored copy, the two versions side by side. Different yet complementary. One represented her history, with all its marks and annotations and imperfections. The other represented possibility, with its pristine pages and empty bookplate waiting to be claimed. Together, they embodied where she had been and where she might go, her story continuing, evolving, enduring. That night, Emily wrote a long letter to Lawrence Richardson, thanking him for the gift and expressing her condolences for his loss. She told him what his son's kindness had meant to her, not just the returned books or this final generous gesture, but the recognition of what the collection represented, the respect for its significance in her life. "Your son saw something most people in my life couldn't see," she wrote, "that books are never just objects, never just things that take up space. They're conversations across time, connections between readers, bridges between who we were and who we're becoming." I only met him twice, but in those meetings, he changed how I think about loss and recovery, about what can be restored and what must be rebuilt differently. As she sealed the envelope, Emily realized that her search had shifted in ways she hadn't fully articulated even to herself. What had begun as a desperate attempt to reclaim exactly what was lost had evolved into something more nuanced, a selective restoration of what mattered most, combined with an openness to new additions, new directions, new meaning. Her collection would never be identical to what it had been. Some books would remain lost, some memories unrecovered, but perhaps that was as it should be. Perhaps her library, like Emily herself, needed to incorporate both continuity and change, both remembrance and growth. She placed the Blake editions side by side on her nightstand before turning out the lights, the damaged original and the pristine replacement, both now part of her story, both now precious in different ways. Emily was shelving new arrivals at Landmark when her phone vibrated in her pocket. She usually ignored calls during work hours, but something intuition perhaps made her check. The screen, her brother's name flashed, unusual for a Tuesday morning. "Everything okay if I take this?" she asked Diana, who was arranging a display nearby. "Go ahead," Diana nodded toward the back room. "Take your time." Emily slipped into the small employee break area. "Michael, is everything all right?" "Hey, her brother's voice sounded hesitant. "Yeah, everything's fine. Well, mostly fine. I'm actually in town. Surprise visit to Mom and Dad." "Oh," Emily sat on the worn couch. "How are they?" "That's kind of why I'm calling." Michael paused. "I was going through some stuff in the garage, helping Dad organize, and I found something. A box labeled Emily's Books Keep." Emily's breath caught. "What?" "It's not much," Michael continued quickly. "Maybe 20 books. But they look, I don't know. They look special. One has a note about being from your first boyfriend. Another has a ticket stub from Paris. That kind of thing." The descriptions triggered immediate recognition. Alex's gift of Murakami's Norwegian Wood on their 3-month anniversary, the paperback copy of A Movable Feast she'd read while sitting along the Seine. Small books, insignificant in monetary value but rich with personal history. "They kept some," Emily whispered, more to herself than to Michael. "Looks like it. Found them behind Dad's old fishing gear. Not sure if they meant to keep them from you or if they just he trailed off. Forgot they had them," Emily finished. "Maybe." Michael sounded doubtful. "Anyway, I thought you should know. They're not here right now, dentist appointments or something. I could ... I could bring the box to you, if you want." Emily closed her eyes, processing. More books recovered, not by her own searching but by chance, by her brother's intervention. And not just any books, but volumes with specific memories attached, specific significance in her life story. "Yes," she said finally, "I'd like that." They arranged to meet after Emily's shift. Michael would come to her apartment, his first visit since she'd moved. The conversation shifted to lighter topics. his job in tech, his new girlfriend, their mother's latest health kick. But Emily's thoughts remained fixed on the box of books, on what their existence might mean. Had her parents intentionally held these back? Were they planning to return them eventually, or had they simply been unable to part with them, recognizing their importance despite their dismissive words? Or was it simpler than that? Had they just forgotten this particular box in the chaos of the estate sale? The rest of her shift passed in a distracted blur. Emily made small talk with customers, processed purchases, shelved returns, all while mentally cataloging which books might be in that box, what memories they might contain. Michael arrived at her apartment building just as she returned from work. He looked good, tanned from California living, his hair longer than when she'd last seen him, but his smile the same as always. "Nice place," he said after they hugged, following her up the stairs. "Smaller than your old apartment, right?" "Much smaller," Emily agreed. "But it works for me." Inside, Michael looked around with undisguised curiosity. His gaze lingered on her bookshelf now, about half filled with a mix of recovered volumes and new acquisitions. "Building it back up, huh?" He gestured to the shelf. "Slowly," Emily confirmed. "Different this time." Michael nodded, then pointed to the box he'd set down. "These should help." Emily knelt beside the cardboard box, opening the flaps with careful hands. Inside, just as Michael had described, were about 20 books, a random assortment with no apparent organizational principle except their connection to her life. The Murakami from Alex, the Hemingway from Paris, a tattered copy of Anne of Green Gables she'd read so many times the spine had split, a volume of Mary Oliver poetry she'd bought after her first heartbreak, a signed Margaret Atwood she'd waited 3 hours in line to get, each one a specific memory, a specific moment in her history. Each one she had mourned separately among the hundreds lost. "They kept these," she said softly, lifting out the Atwood. "Why these?" Michael shrugged, sitting on her small sofa. "I can't speak for them, but there were post-it notes." "Post-it notes?" "Yeah, like little markers." Michael leaned forward. The Murakami had a note that said "gift from college boyfriend." The Hemingway said "Paris trip," like they were trying to, I don't know, catalog them somehow. Emily considered this new information. Her parents, who had dismissed her books as meaningless clutter, had apparently tried to identify which ones held personal significance, had attempted, in their limited way, to understand what these specific volumes might mean to her. It wasn't enough. It didn't erase the betrayal or heal the breach entirely, but it was something. An acknowledgement, however inadequate, that the books weren't just things to her. "Did they say anything about them?" she asked. "About why they kept these particular ones?" Michael shook his head. "No, and I didn't ask, wasn't sure how to bring it up without creating drama while I'm staying there." He hesitated. "But I got the feeling they might not have known what to do with them. Like they realized too late they'd made a mistake but didn't know how to fix it." Emily placed the books one by one on her coffee table, reacquainting herself with each volume. "Pride goes both ways," she said finally. "Theirs and mine. Always has in our family." Michael agreed with a small smile. "You could call them, about the books." Emily considered the suggestion. The weekly phone calls with her parents remained stilted, surface level. Neither side had broached the subject of the books since her letter and their awkward response. Would acknowledging these recovered volumes help, or just reopen barely healed wounds? "I'll think about it," she said. Michael stayed for dinner takeout eaten at her small table while they caught up properly. It was good to see him, to reconnect with family in a way that felt genuine and supportive. As he prepared to leave, he paused at her bookshelf. "I remember when I used to tease you about all your books," he said, running a finger along the spines. "Called them dust collectors. They were." Emily smiled. "The best kind. I get it more now." Michael turned to her. "After reading your letter, one you copied me on, about how books were like, what did you call it, a physical manifestation of your inner life?" Emily nodded, surprised and touched that he had not only read her letter, but remembered her words. "Anyway," Michael continued, "I'm sorry about what happened. And I'm glad you're rebuilding both the collection and your life." After he left, Emily sat alone with the newly recovered books spread around her. 20 more volumes returned from what she had thought was permanent loss, not by her searching or strategizing, but through an unexpected channel. A brother, who had once teased her about her obsession, now becoming an ally in its partial restoration. She picked up her phone and scrolled to her parents' number. Her thumb hovered over it, hesitating. Then, before she could overthink it, she pressed call. 1 year after Emily discovered her empty library, her collection had taken on a new character entirely. The bookshelf in her apartment now expanded to 3 units that lined one wall completely held approximately 200 volumes, less than a quarter of her original library in quantity, but different in quality, and curation. About half were recovered books from her past collection, some found through Margaret's bookfinding service, some through Emily's own persistent searching, some through unexpected channels, like Michael's discovery. Each recovery had felt like reuniting with an old friend, each one significant in its own way. The other half were new acquisitions, books purchased with her employee discount at Landmark, gifts from friends, recommendations from customers that had resonated deeply enough to earn a permanent place in her home. These new additions weren't mere replacements for what was lost. They represented the person Emily was becoming, not just who she had been. On the anniversary of her return from rehabilitation, Emily took the day off work. The date had been circled on her calendar for weeks, not as a day of mourning, but as a milestone to acknowledge. Dr. Winters had suggested creating a ritual of some kind, a way to mark the passage of time and the progress made. Emily began by making coffee and sitting by her window, the morning light illuminating her bookshelves. With her journal open on her lap, she reflected on the year's journey, the initial shock and grief, the frantic searching, the slow healing, the gradual rebuilding. Her relationship with her parents remained complicated. The phone call after Michael's visit had been difficult, her mother tearful, her father defensive, then apologetic in his own gruff way. They had kept those 20 books intentionally, it turned out, setting them aside because they had recognized inscriptions or obvious personal connections, a small gesture that came far too late, but one that Emily had acknowledged as an attempt, however inadequate, at understanding. They had visited her apartment once, 3 months ago. The visit had been brief and awkward, her mother's eyes lingering on the growing bookshelves with an unreadable expression. But they had brought a housewarming gift, a small potted plant that still thrived on her windowsill, and had made an effort to ask about her job, her new friends, her life. Not healing, exactly, but a kind of tentative rebuild, like her book collection itself. After finishing her coffee, Emily began the ritual she had planned. From her shelves, she selected 12 books, one to represent each month of the past year, not necessarily books acquired during those months, but volumes that somehow embodied what that time had meant in her journey. For the first month, her grandmother's Rossetti volume, the first significant recovery, the book that had given her hope when she needed it most. For the second, the Blake first edition that Richardson had left her, a reminder that generosity could come from unexpected sources. For the third, a battered paperback mystery from her teenage years, found at a used bookstore in Brooklyn, after Margaret tracked it down, a reminder of persistence rewarded. For the fourth, Station 11, the first book given to her at Landmark, representing new beginnings built around old passions. For each month, Emily selected a volume that carried meaning beyond its contents, books that mapped her emotional geography over the year of loss and recovery, grief and growth. With the 12 books arranged in a circle on her living room floor, Emily sat cross-legged in their center. From her bag, she removed a small notebook bound in soft leather, a gift from Diana on Emily's 6-month anniversary at the bookstore. "For your thoughts," Diana had written inside the cover, because sometimes our own stories need recording, too. In this notebook, Emily had been documenting her recovery process, not just the search for lost books, but the rebuilding of her life. Notes from therapy sessions with Dr. Winters, reflections on sobriety milestones, observations about how her relationship with books was evolving. Today, she opened to a fresh page and wrote a letter to herself, acknowledging the pain of what had happened a year ago, but also recognizing how that loss had ultimately forced growth that might otherwise never have occurred. "The library I'm building now is intentional in a way the old one wasn't," she wrote. "Each book earned its place not just by existing or being affordable or interesting in the moment, but by mattering deeply. The collection is smaller but more meaningful, quality over quantity, depth over breadth." When she finished writing, Emily returned to her bookshelves and carefully reorganized them. Not by author or genre as she once had, but in a new system entirely, books grouped by the role they played in her life. A section for books that had shaped her thinking. A section for books that had provided comfort in difficult times. a section for books that challenged her perspectives, a section for books given as gifts. Their inscriptions, a record of connections with others. It was a deeply personal organization system that would make sense to no one but Emily, which was precisely the point. This collection wasn't for display or impression. It was for her alone, a physical manifestation of her inner landscape. As she worked, Emily reflected on how her relationship with books had changed over the past year. She still loved them, still found solace and challenge and connection in their pages, but she no longer defined herself by ownership, no longer measured her identity by the number of volumes on her shelves. Working at Landmark had taught her that she could be surrounded by books without possessing them all, that she could recommend a beloved title to a customer and take joy in their discovery without needing to own a copy herself, that the conversation between readers and books existed beyond the confines of personal libraries. When the reorganization was complete, Emily stepped back to survey her work. The shelves looked different now, not ordered in any way a visitor would recognize, but making perfect sense to her. Each section told a story. Each grouping represented a facet of her experience. In the center of the middle shelf, she had created a small memorial of sorts, the empty space where hundreds of books would never return. Not a gap to be filled, but an acknowledgement of what was lost. Beside this space sat her grandmother's poetry collection and the recovered volumes from Michael's discovery, bridges between past and present, between loss and renewal. Emily ran her fingers along the spines, feeling the different textures, the various heights and thicknesses. Some were pristine, some well-worn, some contained her notes from years ago, some held thoughts she'd added only recently. Each one a conversation, a relationship, a piece of who she was and who she was becoming. The collection was still growing gradually, intentionally, with meaning rather than momentum. But Emily no longer felt the desperate need to replace everything that was lost. Some books would remain only in memory, and perhaps that was as it should be. Their absence had created space for new discoveries, new connections, new understanding. As evening approached, Emily selected a volume from her newly organized shelves, not one of the recovered books, but a recent acquisition recommended by a customer at Landmark. Settling into her armchair by the window, she opened to the first page, ready to begin a new conversation, to add another thread to the tapestry of her reading life. The idea came to Emily during a quiet afternoon shift at Landmark. A customer had approached the counter, description in hand, but no title or author, just the memory of a book that had meant something to her years ago. The woman's face had lit up with recognition when Emily located it after some careful questioning and searching. "I've been looking for this for years," the woman had said, clutching the volume. "It's not valuable or anything, but it mattered to me. I read it during a difficult time." Emily had smiled, understanding completely. Some books find us exactly when we need them. That night, Emily couldn't stop thinking about the interaction, about the joy on the woman's face, about the significance of reconnecting with a book that had once provided comfort or insight or escape. It reminded her of her own search, her own recoveries, but from the opposite perspective. A week later, she approached Helen with a proposal: bookfinding. Helen considered the idea as a side service of the store. "Exactly," Emily nodded. "Not just special orders for new books, but helping people locate specific used or out-of-print volumes. Books they read as children, books they regret lending and never getting back, books that mattered to them but got lost along the way." Helen looked thoughtful. "It's an interesting idea. Not hugely profitable, probably, but it might bring in customers who become regulars. How would it work?" Emily outlined her vision. A simple form customers could fill out with as many details as they remembered about the book they were seeking. She would use her connections with Margaret and other bookfinders, her knowledge of online marketplaces, and specialized dealers, to locate copies. Landmark would charge a modest finder's fee in addition to the book's cost. "I think it could be meaningful," Emily concluded, "not just as a service, but as a way to reconnect people with books that mattered to them, to help them recover pieces of their reading history." Helen agreed to a 3-month trial. Emily created a display near the register. "Lost books found. Reconnect with the volumes that shaped you." The response was immediate and enthusiastic, customers filling out forms with descriptions ranging from detailed red hardcover, published in the 1960s, about a family living in Alaska, to amusingly vague blue cover, "Something about a dog made me cry." Emily approached each request like a literary detective, piecing together clues, following hunches, reaching out to her growing network of booksellers and collectors. Success wasn't guaranteed. Some descriptions were simply too vague, some volumes too obscure, but her hit rate was impressive. And each successful find brought the kind of joy she recognized from her own recovery journey, the delight of reconnection, of holding in your hands a book you thought was lost forever. The side project quickly became Emily's passion, consuming her off hours and lunch breaks. Diana teased her gently about her obsession, but with obvious affection. "You've found your calling," she said one day. "Literary detective work suits you." After 6 months, the bookfinding service had become a distinctive feature of Landmark, drawing customers from neighboring areas and generating write-ups in local publications. Helen expanded Emily's hours to accommodate the growing demand, and they created a dedicated space in the store for consultations and pickups. On a crisp fall day, 2 years after Emily had first discovered her empty library, she arrived at Landmark to find a familiar face waiting outside before opening hours. Her mother, looking smaller somehow than Emily remembered, clutching her purse with nervous hands. "Mom," Emily said, surprised, "I didn't know you were coming by." "I should have called," her mother acknowledged, "but I was afraid I'd lose my nerve." Emily unlocked the store, leading her mother inside. The space was peaceful before opening, books waiting in orderly rows, morning light slanting through the windows. "Beautiful store," her mother commented, looking around. "You seem happy here." "I am," Emily confirmed, setting down her bag. "What brings you by?" Her mother opened her purse and removed a folded piece of paper, one of Emily's bookfinding forms, filled out in her mother's neat handwriting. "Your father saw an article about your service," she explained, "in the neighborhood newsletter. He showed it to me, and I thought I'd try." Emily accepted the form, scanning its contents. Her breath caught as she read the description. A collection of poetry by Emily Dickinson. Dark blue cloth cover, gilded edges, inscription inside reads, "To Elizabeth with love. Christmas 1957. Originally belonged to Elizabeth Marlowe, then her granddaughter. Part of a larger collection." Emily looked up at her mother, unable to speak. "I know you recovered most of your grandmother's poetry books," her mother said hesitantly. "Michael told us, but he mentioned you were still missing the Dickinson. I remembered because it was your namesake, Emily. You're looking for this book for me," Emily finally managed. Her mother nodded, her hands twisting together. "I know, it doesn't make up for what happened, for what we did, but I hoped it might be a place to start." Emily sat heavily on a nearby stool, the form still in her hand. "We sold the Dickinson at the estate sale," she said quietly. "I've been looking for it for 2 years." "I know," her mother said. "That's why I filled out the form. I thought maybe you could find it with your connections, that maybe I could pay for that service as a small way to make amends." The gesture was simultaneously inadequate and profound. Inadequate because finding one book couldn't erase the loss of hundreds, couldn't heal the breach of trust entirely. Profound because it represented her mother's first real acknowledgement of what the books had meant to Emily, of their significance beyond mere objects. "Thank you," Emily said finally. "I'll look for it. We'll look for it." Her mother nodded, visibly relieved. "I should go, let you open the store." She turned to leave, then hesitated. "Your father and we've been talking about what happened, about your letter." Emily waited. "We didn't understand," her mother continued. "We still don't, not entirely, but we're trying to, and we're sorry, Emily, truly sorry. It wasn't everything. It didn't erase the past or magically heal the relationship, but it was something, a recognition, however belated, of the harm done, an attempt, however imperfect, at understanding." "I know," Emily said softly. "Thank you for coming today." After her mother left, Emily sat alone in the quiet store, the bookfinding form still in her hand. The irony wasn't lost on her that her service, born from her own experience of loss and recovery, had provided a channel for this tentative reconnection with her mother, that the search that had once consumed her had evolved into something that could help others, and now, perhaps, help heal her own family relationships. That evening, Emily added a new entry to her leather journal. Not about the missing Dickinson volume, though she would certainly begin searching for it, but about the unexpected ways healing could occur. "The circular paths recovery sometimes took 2 years ago," she wrote. I lost my library and thought I'd lost part of myself with it. Now I help others find their lost books, and in doing so, I've found something I never expected: purpose born from loss. Connection through shared understanding of what books can mean. On her bookshelves, the collection continued to evolve recovered volumes, alongside new discoveries, each one earning its place through significance rather than mere acquisition. The empty space she had preserved as a memorial to what was lost remained, but it no longer dominated the shelves or her thoughts. It was simply part of the story, a chapter in her history, but not the conclusion. Emily closed her journal and returned it to its place on her shelf between her grandmother's Rossetti and the Blake first edition from Richardson. Not alphabetical, not chronological, but exactly where it belonged in the geography of her life. One volume among many, each one a conversation, a relationship, a thread in the tapestry of who she was and who she was becoming. Outside her window, the city continued its constant motion. Inside, in this space she had created, Emily felt the satisfaction of coming full circle, of loss transformed into purpose, of endings that became new beginnings, of stories that continued beyond what seemed like their final pages.